So here we are, December 31st, 2020.
Still 2020, yeah.
Yeah, today it's still
The last
2020.
day.
How was this year? How has this year been for you?
Wow, good question. Well, we actually both did the annual reflection
Oh,
workshop,
fuck
right?
yeah, of course.
Yeah, so one of the things I figured in that workshop, to keep it short, is, and in the annual reflection in general, so with an annual reflection, you basically go through your year and you reflect on certain things that matter to you. And one of the exercises we did is just month by month list all the events of your year. And one insight that I had is that my year was definitely a lot more intense and chaotic than I thought it was. And I usually underestimate it. So
In
usually
what
I'm
way?
like, if I list all the events of my year in total, and I just look at that list, I am surprised at how much has happened and changed in all this. The travel, the acquiring of blockboards, relation starting, ending, accident where I broke half of my
Oh,
face.
that happened also.
Yeah, it was
Oh, it was
like
this year.
it was all this year,
Oh
man.
man.
And the list goes on. I was like, holy crap! Like it's a lot.
Oh, you recovered well, I have to say.
Yeah,
You
it's
barely see it.
barely. Yeah, you see the scars here, and there's still it's still some scar tissue underneath here, and there's just a lot of screws and plates in my face.
Nice. Yeah,
So,
Terminator.
yeah, Terminator, exactly. Yeah, I'll be back. But yeah, man, it was intense, more intense than I thought, and that sets the intention for next year to have a more boring year, like a more stable, consistent, boring year.
Really
Yeah, I'm gonna do that.
interesting because I think this year for me it wasn't boring, but it was very localized at one place in in on Earth, the Netherlands.
Yeah,
I've only been away for like 2 weeks. Of course, thanks to COVID, our big friend.
oh yeah,
So in that sense, I do not want to have a more boring year next year. Of course, we have to see what's going to happen, right? So right now, to put it into context, we have no clue what next year will look like,
true.
and if they will open up things and how that's going to play out. But yeah, that's going to be very interesting. This was quite a year for us. Also, we started this podcast, of course.
Again,
Yeah.
yeah, see another thing, yeah,
Yeah.
and for this podcast also, that's one of the things I relate to wanting a more boring year is to dive into things like this more. To look back at to 2021, and then say it's the year that I kind of put my head down. I went into consistency, and I got results that mattered to me over the long run. To look back maybe in 5 years and say, whoa, 2021, that was a year where I really didn't do shit. I didn't travel, but I reached all of these milestones for myself just by actually putting in the work and just going, full boring. And then after that, enjoy it maybe. Yeah.
That was 2020 for me.
Yeah, you were like,
when
just,
when I look back at the last maybe 10 years, then 2020 was the year that I really start to do shit.
cool.
Not really like
Oh, you've always done shit, right?
always done shit, but just do this the self actualization and the podcasting, the Microdose Pro thing. Those were things I always had in my mind I wanted to do, but just never did. And this year allowed me to just start with that. And
Cool, man.
it was a crazy year. But one of my insights I had from the annual reflections was that next year I want to achieve more flow states, because that's a nice bridge.
Yeah, very, very much so, yeah.
I'm very proud of that. No, but we want to have more. I want to have more flow states, and this is something that I have been reading about for years now, and it was quite cool to see that you also were into this. When I met you at Blockport,
Yeah.
then you said this last time. We were having a chat about Chick Set Me High, the guy who came up with the idea of a flow state.
Yeah, and whose name I can't pronounce. Still can't, by the way.
Yeah,
But yeah,
it's quite easy once you get the trick. But
Chick said Mahai.
Chick Set Me High, that's it. But I thought it was quite cool to see that you were also really into this, and that we are both really intrinsically motivated to learn more about flow, to what it is, and to want to implement really this attitude in towards in our lives.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was interesting. And I thought this podcast, of course, that is also why we wanted to do this, is that we can then allow ourselves to really dive into a concept like this,
Mhm.
and then to sit down here and check if we, can upgrade each other's knowledge, or that we have, a few uh, tips and tricks for each other, that kind of stuff, or that we really can dive deeper into a specific concept. And I wanted to do that today with flow. So by no means we are experts in flow states. We are just guys that read about it, that try to use tools and techniques to implement more flow into their lives.
Yeah.
And this is the intention I want to set for this podcast.
Cool. Yeah, I have the same. Yeah, I can definitely align with that intention. It's funny you say, because part of the reason I would want to get more like more boringness in my life in 2021 is exactly also because of flow states. But to see how I can integrate flow states more into my life using the concepts that we can probably discuss and share in this podcast, and maybe more to come. So yeah, let's do that. I'm curious then. First of all, for us, we're talking about flow, and we want to put it more in perspective, and also integrate it more into our lives. But what would be a reason for anyone to want to do that? Like, why is it important to consciously think about flow states in your life rather than just living your life as you're already used to?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I think that the why aspect of why flow is important. That is a great starting point. I remember when I first experienced a flow state. This was a long time ago, but I was drawing, and at one point I realized, hey, 5 hours have passed, and I didn't even realize that it felt like 2 minutes,
Wow.
and I was in such a utter state of consciousness, and that I when I came out of that, I was, wow, what happened here? I was away, and my whole ego was gone,
Mm.
and for me, just the experience of that feeling, and we can dive into what it all means later, but like just the experience itself,
Yeah.
the conscious experience, that for me was something that I thought, this I want to achieve more. And later on I achieved that in all aspects of my life, in business, or in working out, or in communicating with people. I found this flow thingy to be applicable to many things in my life.
Oh yeah.
And when I was in that was just the reason to be alive for me. It was just you feel this is why I'm alive. And one big thinker is Stephen Kotler. He's a current day flow researcher. He calls this the concept of a bliss junkie. That is someone who has tasted the flow state, and now wants to. This is the optimal state of being, and he wants to implement this, again and again and again.
Right, right, right.
And that for me is the why. So it's a very personal and perhaps even egocentric motive in order to want that.
But is it for you as well? Would you also say it's the optimal state of being for you?
Yeah.
Okay, wow. So basically, your why is, yeah, basically to, I don't know, how should you say that? Like, to live the best life with the most happiness possible, I guess, which is a very common and understandable goal to have, but then also sustainable.
Yeah, exactly. There are a few things in life that you do in order to achieve other things, to get further along.
Right.
Like work for many people, and also for me, most parts of my work are, they are exotelic, as Csikszentmihalyi would call it. So you have the concept of something that is exotelic, so the reward is outside of you.
Right.
So money or power or fame or whatever, you do that because you want to achieve something.
Yeah.
But then you also have the concept that is called autotelic, and that is something that you do for itself, for the experience itself.
Okay, so if I would do my job simply to make money, it would be exotelic.
Yeah,
And if I would do my job simply because I love my job and
yeah,
money is a secondary consequence,
exactly.
then it would be autotelic.
Yeah, and for me, reaching flow in whatever you do, but that is the most purest autotelic experience for me personally. So just the experience in itself is enough to justify why I want to have that.
Yeah, yeah, that does make sense. Okay, so it's basically a goal in and of itself.
Exactly, that's it. Yeah.
Okay, well,
Why do you want to party? Or why do you want to read? Or reading, maybe
I mean,
not. That's not
Well,
Well,
for me, reading as well. Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
of course, to really kind of simplify it makes me feel good.
Yeah,
It's like, yeah, that's pretty much it.
yeah. So it makes you feel good,
Yeah,
and in the end, it's about things you want to do to feel good, right?
yeah,
You can have
yeah,
all the
yeah.
money in the world, but like, does it really make you feel good if it's only money?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, like, and that's I think that relates to my personal why maybe is we've all seen and felt the short-lived experiences of enjoyment. Um, getting your salary, um, getting a girl's number. You know,
Bitcoin going up right now.
a bit going on. Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah, that I must admit that's a very exotelic, but
Oh man, that's
certainly,
that's hyper exotelic.
yeah, but certainly rewarding. Yeah,
Yeah.
and then you start to ask yourself, sure, these these experiences of momentary joy or say pleasure, as Csikszentmihalyi.
Yeah, good.
It was okay.
Perfect. Yeah, perfect.
Nice pronunciation on point. Um, as he says, you have pleasure and you have enjoyment. And I would say Bitcoin going up, getting a girl's number, having sex for the first time, all of these like pretty intense, or food, for example, they're pleasurable, right? You would say I derive pleasure from those experiences, but they're short-lived. They'll be over, and in most cases, you'll long for that experience again. You'll be like, if I only could influence the world around me in such a way that I would get that experience again.
Yeah.
Could go back to that restaurant and hopefully get the same thing. Meet that person again and hopefully get the same feeling. Or Bitcoin even going up further. But the thing is, those are, and that's always been for me like a fundamental kind of bottleneck, is they are dependent on my environment. I do not have control over them. So essentially, I feel, reflecting on that, feel like a slave. It's only that by chance that the
Yeah.
environment gives me this that I can enjoy myself, which is, yeah, it's meh. It's only so. But then when you get into autotelic and flow, then suddenly this world opens where you can theoretically you can say, okay, it's completely unrelated to how to like what situations the world will give you, as long as you find a way to make it challenging for yourself, and you can formulate whatever happens to you as maybe a fun challenge in a way, or you can embrace your environment by saying, this super boring job that I have to do, I'm going to try and do it slightly better every time. So you can kind of twist the way you approach the world, and you can derive enjoyment from that. But it's not a momentary thing. It's literally every single experience you get, you theoretically have the opportunity to derive pleasure from it if you formulate it properly for yourself. And yes, I'm gonna make like a small stoic jump here.
Dude, I was about to say, are you describing stoicism or a flow state?
Yeah, that this is, and the cool thing, this is beautiful.
Yeah.
It's so similar, right? Like imagine you I don't know, you get locked up and you're not guilty. You can do two things. You can be extremely angry because you're locked up and not guilty, which is pretty fucked up, or you can say, okay, well, this is a big setback. What is the best thing I can do right now? Well, as flow states and stoicism posits, and I believe that there's a big and great overlap here. Um, you can formulate it in such a way that it's a challenge to deal with it in the best way possible. So you can, what do you still have power over? Your body. You can train. You can make yourself fit. You can derive flow from that. You can meditate. You can learn. You can read, if you're lucky in the right prison, I guess. But all of those things are still within your power, and you can literally, sustainably derive enjoyment from it. It's only within your own mind.
Crazy. I never really made that connection between stoicism and flow states that like you do right now. Uh,
Cool.
But is it then, like you say, enjoyment? Is that a flow state? You can derive meaning, okay, but does it help you to get into a flow state, that mindset?
For me personally, I believe so. It's because there's a struggle phase. Certainly, there's a struggle phase to deal
Yeah.
with like adverse consequences, and I would say there's all the other aspects of flow. Whereas if I only find a reason for myself to believe that I can derive enjoyment from an experience that is actually a setback, I will challenge myself. I see that there is the opportunity. I can clearly see theoretically I could do it. I could derive pleasure from or enjoyment from this. And by focusing and pushing myself onto that and letting go in the training or in the reading, whatever the circumstance is, or breathing if I feel sad or something like this, then I derive enjoyment from it. And if I link this to what Csikszentmihalyi says, then we derive enjoyment. Like flow actually is the best description we have of experiences that give us sustainable enjoyment.
Is that his definition?
Well, that's like having read the book, that's the conclusion I drew, and he talks about the difference between pleasure and enjoyment, of course, where he says, this is actually it is more or less what he says. Yes, what it really is all about is we become a more complex person, complex in the way that we grow internally, right? So you can also say after flow experiences, you there's something left within you that is still valuable. Whereas if you eat something nice, there's not really you haven't grown. But you can feel after a flow experience that your personality or your psyche has grown. Like after a 5 hour drawing session, like having been through that myself as well when I was young, I definitely felt as if I really achieved or changed or something happened within me. And I think that's enjoyable. And I think the same thing is within our control, within Stoicism. Like it in a sustainable way makes you happier. That's what I believe.
Yeah, no, I fully agree, and I think that's a really interesting connection that you made. Um, I think the why right now, it's pretty clear. Like, okay, we have to describe why we like flow and what we are trying to get out of that.
Yeah.
But I think we should also try to give a definition, like what is flow.
Yeah.
Like what do we mean when we talk about flow? And I'm curious to see what your definition of flow really is.
Cool. Sure. I do know that you have done a lot of research into what it is neurochemically, which is stuff that I haven't researched. I'm really interested to hear a little bit more about what's behind that. But for me, how I would define flow. Well, first off, I think the most tangible thing to define it as is just by naming experiences that are like flow rich. And I would say that good examples of flow-rich experiences are sports. It could be rowing, so it could be in a group, right? When you have this perfect alignment with everyone in the group, and you have the same goal. Because, for example, with rowing, you have one person that kind of they shout and they decide the rhythm of the rowing, and everyone has to row at exactly the same time because then you get the most acceleration. Well, feeling completely in sync with others, or when you're dancing with someone and you feel like this, like you're forgetting your environment, and even maybe you don't even hear the music anymore, but you're just completely absorbed in the experience. That's flow state. When you're reading and you're forgetting the time, flow state. When you're talking to someone and you look at your watch and you're like, crap, I have to go, you were in a flow state. Well, drawing is one. Writing for many people is one. The list can go on and go on. I think that's a good definition at least.
All right. So these are all like examples of when you get into a flow state.
Yeah.
Or what flow is. So for me, the definition is it's actually quite simple. It's just a state of consciousness in which you have optimal performance, and in which your ego completely dissolves.
Sure.
And you become one with whatever task at hand you are doing.
Right.
And people call it in the zone, or the whole peak performance.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
It all basically comes down to the same thing, and that is that state of consciousness that you attain in that moment. And that's I also reread Flow from Csikszentmihalyi for this podcast in preparation, and he has one chapter in there where he talks really about consciousness. And I didn't realize this before when I read it a few years back, but the last few years I really, I've read a lot about what is consciousness and all these topics, and he calls it consciousness mastery. And this for me, it's quite interesting because this is purely personal, but I have come to the realization for myself that I think consciousness is the most fundamental layer of reality. This is like, we can go into that a different time. But then to have a systematic approach, like we discussed in this podcast, in order to master your own conscious state, in order to achieve flow states, that is the most amazing thing that you can do, in my opinion. If you can control that state,
Yeah.
and if you can set up your life in order to be in that state, you have become a master of your own consciousness. And yeah, that is quite a link I recently made. I'm still meditating on this. What does it mean, and how does this translate into my own life?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a lifelong journey in a way to
Yeah,
try and reach that. Right. I think I get you. Yeah. I think the definition is great. Like, I would say a good example also that Csikszentmihalyi gives is this is order and disorder in consciousness,
yeah,
where what you're saying is optimal, like an optimal state of consciousness is when you get order in consciousness, and when you have disorder, then you feel things like fear, or you feel stress and all of these things. Those are like that's disorder in consciousness. And then when you deal with the situation, with the adversity, maybe even, then you'll end up in a state of order in consciousness,
yeah,
where there's like a certain, I would say that experiencing flow or feeling flow, and I like the way, by the way, that Csikszentmihalyi focuses on basically he calls it phenomenological, like the experience of flow,
yeah,
rather than a scientific numerical approach to it. And it kind of feels like there's a certain tranquility in flow. It's like this kind of state of being, and it's relieving even. And I think, yeah, of course, we know that, for example, when you focus on something, it turns out that they did research, mentioned in the book as well, that when you ask people that have a disorder, or rather a problem with focusing, then people that have like a attention deficit disorder. So they ask these people, try to focus on something, they look at the brain activity, and they do this a similar thing for people that do not have an attention deficit disorder. Turns out that a big difference in between these two groups is that when the people that report more flow, or like more frequent flow experiences without having an attention deficit disorder, they actually require less energy to concentrate on something than people that have difficulty focusing on one task. Turns out that when we get into a flow state, our brain, parts of our brain at least, are the activity in those regions is minimized.
yeah,
So it's basically like your brain is going like in a very minimal way, is only activating the regions that are relevant for the task at hand, which could be I don't know, reading or something like this, and that's why you forget time and your environment, and you're just completely absorbed in what you're doing.
yeah.
You are what you're doing.
Yeah, the prefrontal cortex goes offline,
Right.
in big parts.
Yeah, that's where a lot of that's like the internal voice kind of aspect, the
Yeah, the
regulatory.
the ego and time, those are constructed in the prefrontal cortex.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's Stephen Kotler had a great analogy about this. He says time is a network effect, and when in a network, when the nodes go down in a network, then the whole network collapses. And you know this probably from the whole blockchain.
Yeah. In computers,
See,
it's
exactly.
yeah.
So time is constructed in the prefrontal cortex. Parts go offline.
Yeah.
The whole concept of time starts to dissolve. Same for the ego.
Yeah. That's true. Like the brain, in essence, seems to be like experience in general seems to be like how do you say it, like a curry of all the regions in your brain activating in a certain harmony.
Yeah,
And as certain regions are like overactivated or underactivated, we have a different cognitive experience. I think more or less that's already what research is showing, right? Like we just certain aspects of our experience in real life are created by regions of our brain.
yeah,
So one last thing to mention there is that for people that have trouble, like if you have trouble getting into a flow state, or you know from yourself that you have trouble focusing, then it's probably worthwhile, because that's what flow kind of indicates, is to use your environment to minimize the distractions, because then you help your brain to deactivate certain regions. So there, I think a really important aspect in flow is focus, as in there's like a big overlap between what you experience when you're deeply focused and you're in a flow state. Probably it's like a very big overlap there. And I would say that if you are good, or like you become good at getting yourself into a super focused state, then that's probably one of the best ways to integrate flow into your life more. I would say, at least for me personally, that's the case. So using your attention wisely seems to be like, yeah,
But this is exactly again what Stephen Kotler says. Like I like the guy. I've read a lot of his books,
yeah,
and he done a ton of amazing research. He says flow follows focus. So
ah,
just that's it. Just focus on something for a certain amount of time, and flow will come. So you have to get yourself in order to focus on something, and it doesn't really matter what it is, but that is key of it. That's key in the whole experience.
yeah, yeah. So would you agree to saying if you learn, and I think that's a nice and big aspect of systematic mastery, if you learn to manage your body and your mind in such a way that you can focus it more at will,
Yeah.
then you'll become a happier person because you
Yeah,
more feel safe.
I think that now we are going into the how part of like how do you attain flow then.
True.
I first want to like just realize add one more thing to the why of flow because to get you briefly mentioned I said I like the neurochemical part of it.
Yeah,
I truly enjoy to see what's happening in the brain itself when you enter a flow state.
yeah,
And that's amazing because then you see there is this cocktail of neurochemicals being released that otherwise you almost only get when you're high on drugs. And since we are both also,
experimenting.
I would say this politically correct, experimenting, what are we doing? We're trying to reach other states of consciousness, and
Yeah,
in a flow state, you get this release of serotonin, dopamine, anandamide, endorphins. You get all these neurochemicals. They are being blasted upon you, and just the whole that cocktail you get that is just an amazing feeling.
yeah,
So you truly get high as fuck on when you're in flow, and yeah, this is a big why, of course.
yeah.
It's hyper addictive to get into a flow state.
Very true. Yeah, it's one of the best feelings. And what makes it even better is that it is way more under your control, and it's way more sustainable. Like it's not nothing external, but it's definitely. I think, and I wonder if you agree. I guess you do. Is that having tried certain, well, I wouldn't say chemicals, but like, yeah, altered states of consciousness. In a myriad of ways. I think also, for example, an ice bath is one of them.
Yeah, definitely.
But also drugs, of course. And having been through some of those experiences, I can safely say that it has helped to have experienced consciousness in such an altered way and in a very flow state kind of way. For example, at least when I use psychedelics, I'm noticing something similar is happening than when I meditate, is I am fully immersed in what I'm seeing. Instead of the me talking to myself, it's a lot less. In many cases, I am fully immersed in what I'm experiencing because it's just so radically different from the usual way. Anyways, that in and of itself is a flow experience, and it perfectly kind of highlights the purity of a flow experience, and it's a good example of a pure flow experience, and I see a lot of overlap and relation between flow experiences in daily life, like when I'm working, and some of the experiences I've had on for example, psychedelics and whatnot. So I think it helps to get a deeper intuitive feeling for what flow is if you've used certain chemicals.
Yeah.
I would say that things like serotonin, so like MDMA,
Yeah, you can link.
and also like psychedelics are also
Oh,
very
but
serotonin
you
heavy
can
as
link
well.
all these neurochemicals to certain drugs. So
Right.
dopamine, that's cocaine.
Yeah.
Serotonin, that's MDMA or ecstasy.
Yeah.
Norepinephrine, that's speed or amphetamine.
Right.
Anandamides, marijuana, and then you have endorphins. That's morphine or painkiller.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So these are all linked to certain drugs, and to get those all at the same time, without then the bad hangover.
Yeah.
Of course, that is it's quite intense.
But you do. I remember you telling me that you need recovery after.
Sure.
Maybe you should go, because I know that the phases of a flow
Yeah.
experience, because then you have recovery after that as well.
Yeah, well, I want to go into that, but first, just to end that part, I think I realized is that apparently evolution wants us to achieve this state. Why would it reward us in this incredible amount?
Yeah. I mean, That's very true. I think I've mentioned this before. Like I see something of a link between basically this self awareness that we want to create and growing our personality through flow. So it seems to be that we can have flow, but we need to get out of it at some point, and then we get back into the raw, like painful reality. But to develop a reason to get into flow, we need you need a certain motivation to get into flow, right? If you're completely demotivated, I would say that getting into a rewarding flow state is a lot harder. So intrinsic motivation helps. Turns out that intrinsic motivation is also very much related to self-control and self-awareness. And I think there's the human psyche, the fact that we are self-aware, that we know that we exist, without getting too philosophical, is pretty weird, right? I mean, it's pretty rad. And I think between those two things, there's a beautiful relation where we are kind of set. And the weird thing is, like, religion also talks about this, like the fact that we are self-aware and we are made self-aware was more or less a curse, or like a punishment, rather, biblically. Well, we are forced to examine ourselves, but thereby, by knowing how we make mistakes and maybe basically how screwed we are, maybe, also to develop a very clear vision of who we want to be. And I think that in and of itself sets us up with this kind of cycle where we become motivated, get into a flow state. We become a more complex human being, as Csikszentmihalyi says. So you grow internally, and then you become self-aware again, as in you're taking a hard look in the mirror and you see the things you want to change, get into a flow state, become a more complex human being. And I think this cycle is something that we can control. Like, we can direct the cycle at a certain long-term goal. So we can say, I want to become a scientist. Well, this cycle of self-awareness and self-growth, I'm going to direct it that way or another way.
Yeah, we can hack this flow state
Yeah.
in order to become better,
Yeah.
and to improve and to grow.
Certainly.
So it's basically, yeah, I'm always these terms like biohacking and flow hacking. You know, they sound pretty cool, but this is kind of what it is. We are using our own evolution, our own biology, in order to excel.
Yeah. Two things actually I still want to mention before we jump into the phases. Sure. And then the rest of the episode is, what I recently kind of found out is, first of all, fasting is a great flow enhancer. Like, being fasted, trying to focus on something is a big tip for enhancing flow. And also a low carbohydrate diet helps a lot for flow state, at least personally. And then another like more psychological thing is, we are, like, our generation, specifically our generation, has so many choices all the time. And linking back to the attention issue, like, if you have many things that you need to focus on at the same time, it's hard to get into a flow state.
Definitely.
So I think it's increasingly important in our generation to become aware of what a flow state is and manage it, because as we've also mentioned in the Second Brain podcast, it's important to understand how you can get ahead, or at least how you can compete, how you can stay relevant, not because you're otherwise not good enough, but simply because that's the way the world works. Developing yourself is part of the meaning in life. Well, we are pretty screwed in our generation with the fact that we have all these devices and all these small micro responsibilities that we constantly need to be aware of, that literally are stealing our willpower, and they're stealing our opportunity for experiencing flow. If you have no television, no internet, no mobile, and you're walking in nature, it's pretty darn easy to get into a flow state.
I would even say they are stealing our neurochemicals.
Yeah,
you get a dopamine hit every time you open Instagram.
Yeah, they're literally
a ping. You get dopamine hit.
Exactly. Yeah, and yeah, I don't want to say it too often, but you end up in essence being a slave, because they're controlling indirectly your attention.
Yeah.
And
I like that everything with you gets back to being a slave.
No, but it's we are all slaves. Free yourself through flow states. But I think in essence, it is kind of true.
You're a slave of your ego, and you release your ego.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, it's only natural to want certain things, but it's I would say that it's important when nowadays you are being bombarded with things you would want to spend your time on, to minimize that. And this is kind of called the paradox of choice. Is, on the one hand, we all believe, reasonably so, that we should increase the amount of choices we have, because then the end result is better. If we have a million kinds of phones to choose from, then when we are done making that decision, it's quite likely that the phone that we've chosen is the best phone out there for us. On the other hand, the whole experience toward choosing that freaking phone is it sucks. It's like not an enjoyable experience. It's way nicer to not have to worry about the phone and actually already be in the situation where you've chosen it and you can relax.
You just need communism, one phone.
Well, yeah, that's kind of okay. Maybe you're right. Let's reformulate the whole thesis. Communism rules. Well, yeah, in a way, like it's the extreme, I would say, but there's something to it.
No,
Like the simplicity there.
I agree with that.
I think there's a reason. It is for some people an ideal to live in a world like that, which I personally might not agree with, but it makes sense. The simplicity to not have to choose too often is extremely important. That's why some people wear the same clothes every day. It helps for enjoyment and flow state.
Like me.
Like you, yeah, you always wear the black t-shirt. Yeah, it's true.
I just have this t-shirt. I have like 10 at home. it's great.
But it does, like, you can attest then. It helps.
Oh, for me, why I do it is I don't want to use mental energy in the morning in order to, choose what I'm going to wear. I rather, it's an energy efficient motive.
Right, but I would argue that that's partly related to the flow state.
Yeah, definitely. Oh yeah, for sure. Like, what gets me out of... Okay, we can go into the how, I think, right now. That's a good thing. What gets me into a flow state is to have a specific structure in life, a method, a routine, in order to achieve that state. So, in order to understand how a flow state works, there are 4 phases. So, first you have the struggle phase, and this is the hardest part of a flow state. You need to use your brain, your mind, the power of your your mental capacity in order to tackle a problem.
Right.
And this often results in you struggling in order to get ahead, to get through that state. You can focus on you're a coder, you code, and maybe you're stuck with a problem, you can't solve it, and you're getting frustrated.
Yeah.
You have to get through that state, and that's why flow is also it's such a big reward, because you have to actually do work. It's not something that you just can get into.
True.
So the struggle phase is essential. Then the second phase, that is the release phase, and then you let go. Maybe you go for a small walk. You do this often, I know.
Yeah.
And by being in nature, you release the problem for a while, but you get all these insights. Your lateral thinking starts to go, get off, and
Yeah.
this is when you have an insight. Hey, this is how I can solve it. And phase 3, then this second phase allows you to go into phase 3. That is the flow state itself.
Okay.
So here is the optimal performance. Your ego is dissolving. You are just coding like crazy, and you feel it. You can almost you are the code itself. You're going into it.
Feels good. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It feels amazing. That is the autotelic part of it. You want to be in that state.
Yeah.
And then the 4th phase is just the recovery phase. So there is need for a process of recovering, because it's a very, of course, intense experience, and you need to process whatever you've done. And it's good to also to have, again, like some minor physical activity, yoga or a walk or whatever, because this helps you in order to process the whole experience.
Right.
You cannot go on forever. You cannot be in flow 24/7. That's impossible.
Okay, it's even impossible to be.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I think I can attest to that. Is that at the end of a flow state, there's this kind of a very enjoyable, maybe tiredness even, but it feels good. There's like it's similar maybe to having exercise very intensively, like endorphins maybe, but then needing some rest and then trying to get back into it. One thing that I think is really important, like when you look at these phases, making it easier to go through the struggle phase, like because you have struggle, you have intense struggle, and you have like more automated, simplified struggle, where that is actually a habit. And if you can get yourself into the habit of starting with this cycle by using triggers around you, like your physical environment. An example that I can give is I have now kind of the regimen of having a 1 to 2 hour morning study where I learn something interesting. And now what I try to do is I organize my environment to prepare it with triggers for my flow state.
Yeah.
So when I wake up, first thing I do is I turn on music. I take a cold shower, I make coffee, stay fasted, and my book is already on the table from the night before with a pen right next to it. My iPad is ready, it already has the book open, and those things, like seeing that when I walk into the living room, is the trigger I need to kind of semi automatically sit down and start doing it without having to push myself because it's all already there. And not distracting yourself, but like only using those triggers in the morning and like focusing on those. Yeah, it's a great flow hack.
Stephen Kotler, in his latest book, The Habit of Ferocity, he calls this automating your flow state. So you are building systems in place. What you're doing, you are putting your book already there. So you're automating the process of getting through that struggle phase.
Right.
So you are eliminating the possibility of struggle in there, because the biggest part of of going to the gym, it's not the workout itself, it is getting yourself in order to go to the gym.
Absolutely.
And if you can automate that process, like I do, the day before the evening I go to bed, before I go to gym, I already have all my stuff ready. And so I wake up and everything is already there. So I don't even have to go through this struggle phase. That's automated. And those are small tricks in order to build your life more around flow.
Yeah, yeah. I think you can integrate flow states into your life by integrating the right habits into your life. So there, you can integrate habits that are bad habits, like scrolling social media, and you can also integrate habits that are literally flow states, where you can have triggers like your clothes for the gym or like my book in the morning to get yourself into a flow state more easily. And I think this is what James Clear mentions in Atomic Habits, a really good practical book about habits. Is you can basically, by making it easy, that's one of the rules that he posits, make it easy for yourself. So remove a lot of the turmoil you go through to trigger yourself to get into that habit. So instead of waking up and still having to grab your clothes, which in its own is already a challenge, it's annoying, you're still groggy from waking up, you make it easier for yourself. And also, for example, similarly, by living close to a gym. Not having to walk or cycle 30 minutes to a gym helps. If you have a gym 5 minutes from your house, it will help you get into flow states more often and make you a happier person.
And that's all just about that struggle phase.
Yeah.
That you have to minimize that struggle, and also just the simple act of awareness that, hey, I'm struggling right now, but I will be rewarded if I go through this. That helps already to push yourself through that state.
And there's a neurochemical reason for that even. Like in the past, I think, I don't know exactly until when, but we common knowledge was more or less dopamine is increased, or we experience dopamine when we are rewarded. But it's rather the anticipation of reward that already spikes dopamine. And this is also how habits are formed, is when you've gone through an experience a few times that is rewarding. It could be bad or good, but eventually it ends up being rewarding. Then by anticipating that situation, we already get a reward. And that's what triggers this whole thing. So that's also why these triggers work, is you see, for example, I see the book. I already get a short spike of dopamine by seeing that, because I imagine myself being happy and proud after having, done my work.
You mentioned the term trigger now a few times. I think it's good to go a bit into the concept of a flow trigger, because there are actually 22 defined flow triggers, and a flow trigger is just a precondition in order to blast your consciousness into flow. So a flow trigger can be clear goals. That's a flow trigger. Or a flow trigger can be novelty or a rich environment. Those are all things that will get you into flow. And it's good to be aware of your own flow triggers, because not everyone is susceptible for the same triggers.
Right.
So let's say, I think the Flow Genome Project has a flow profile test.
Okay. Oh yeah.
I recently did it. And it's just, I think, 10 questions, and you get your flow profile, and then you see, hey, these triggers are probably your triggers. And you can divide those triggers into internal triggers and external triggers.
Okay.
And it's really good to be aware of those. For me, novelty is a big one. So I thrive when I have new input. I gather new. I'm in working in a new environment. So let's say I work in the office 2 days a week, work at home 3 days a week right now. I do this consciously because I know if I work for 5 days in the same place, I'm not performing optimally anymore. Right. So these are these are tools for you in order to steer your direction again in towards that flow state.
Right. So by understanding your own flow triggers, like
Yeah,
having this self-awareness, you can use these as tools
exactly.
to focus more on what matters to you,
Yeah.
and like to kind of consciously direct your attention.
And you also have like group triggers. So
Cool.
in a sense, we are having a group right now. We are having a talk. We are more than one person,
Right.
and one of those triggers is the yes and trigger. This means when you're in a conversation and you want to achieve flow as a group and you want to merge consciousness, then it's beneficial to agree and to stack knowledge on top of that. So this is what we're doing right now. We're giving each other knowledge, and yes, nice, but also this and also that, and that helps us to climb that ladder together. We're getting into that flow state. That would be different if we would full on have a war. Then it would be more ego, and that just to be aware of those triggers that really can help you in order to get more flow. That's it.
Right. Because you can be in a situation, you can see like, hey, I have an opportunity now to create a flow state for both of us by being the yes and initiator.
Exactly.
But on the other hand, Csikszentmihalyi also mentions this, is that one of the kind of games of flow, there's four kind of things we can do, activities that we can do to get into flow. One of them is competitiveness as well, like competition. Like, for example, I don't know, rowing is also a competition, soccer is a competition. In many cases, we end up, because of the chance of winning, that's a perfect, this anticipation of reward is a perfect thing for us to get into a flow state. But there's also something he calls vertigo, which is the use of altered states of consciousness. And it can also be drugs, of course, but it can also, for example, be that you turn around a lot and then you get dizzy. This effect is also something that can give you a certain sense of enjoyment. And there's two others. One of them is mimicry, so mimicking. Theater is maybe a good example of that. And like creating environments that are simulations, more or less, experiencing the possible imaginative future or situations. And then gambling basically is also one. So and you can kind of extrapolate this to like religion, even saying that we believe that there's a certain control over the environment, but there's a novelty factor in there. We don't have the control, but we can think that we can predict certain things. That like excitement is also very flow inducing. So I think those are all kinds of those are parts of life. Also, many of the things that you've mentioned, by which anyone could use flow to their advantage or create flow for themselves a little bit more by directing attention towards that. And I think the last, like maybe strongest point I want to make when it comes to flow and the reason for flow and why you should use all these tactics is your life, like your conscious life, is literally nothing more than your attention. Like your attention is your life. Like what you focus on, what you experience in a moment, what you say, what you see, that's your life. That's literally how you'll walk around all the time. If you consciously take control over that, it is the best way to end up living the life that you want, and to not throw anything away. And I think, yeah, to not be a slave, basically.
That is what I meant with the consciousness mastery point.
It's full circle.
It's full circle.
Yeah.
And that's it. We are basically just consciousness.
Yeah.
And whatever we focus on, that's it.
Yeah.
That's what we are.
Yeah.
And if we can take control of that, then life will be amazing.
Yeah, and it already is, because that's the fun thing. That in and of itself, taking control of that consciousness and making your life better, is flow inducing. So
Yeah.
like it even gets better. Like it's a perfect kind of equilibrium that is self-reinforcing. It's
Epic.
I think
All right. I think you have a call in.
I do. Yeah,
5 minutes.
we have to finish it up. Are there resources you think are relevant?
Many resources. Just start with, if you haven't read it, Flow by Csikszentmihalyi. That's the Bible.
Yeah.
It's a bit old, but it's not at all dated, I would say. Maybe the scientific research is, but not the concept.
Yeah, it's well written as well. It's enjoyable to read it at some
Yeah.
most aspect. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just devour like all the Stephen Collar books. Rise of Superman, The Habit of Ferocity,
Stealing Fire. I
Stealing
think.
Fire is
Yeah.
really good. Jamie Wheal also has one. You have then. I found out this blog from this guy. His name is Troy Ersling, and I think he works with Stephen.
Cool.
and there are some really interesting things on that. I'm not sure. Just Google his name, Troy Ersling.
Troy Ersling. Okay.
He connects all like the neurochemicals to drugs, and he said like, tell me your favorite drug, and I will tell you what flow triggers you have. All these cool connections. And this one is yours. Actually, it's here on my side, but I haven't read it. Willpower. I think you recommend this one.
Yeah, big recommendation if you want to figure out how to control consciousness and what it means to focus and be tired, and how you can create more focus in your life, because it's very dependent on your willpower. Like, can you control your own senses? It is not only your genetics. It is literally also what you've eaten before, how you've slept, who you hang around with, what you believe in. It's all related to, do you have the energy to control your consciousness to get into flow? And this book will teach you a lot about how to manage that.
Great. Perfect. I think that we should end it with this also, because you have to go. This is really like a flow interrupter.
Yeah.
But what I want to do next time is I want to dive into your day. Like, how does your day look like in order to see, hey, what are the specific flow tactics here?
That's a good idea.
Dive deeper into the actual strategies.
Yeah, it's like, but it's also a nice reflection. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Can we improve there? And what kind of flow breakers do we introduce in our day? Because I know I have some. The only book I still want to mention actually is Atomic Habits from James Clear. I think it's short, it's practical in how you can integrate habits more into your life. If you're also very interested in more like the theory around habits, it's also older, but it's a good book, The Power of Habit, by Duhigg. And I think that's it. I think those are all. And you have the Flow Genome Project, of course. I'm going to look that up.
Yeah, sweet.
All right, cool,
awesome, man. See you.
Thank you.